The landmark judgment is expected in the Constitutional Court today that could have repercussions for the municipal polls. The IEC is appealing a ruling that the voters' roll should have the addresses of all those registered for the upcoming vote. It says updating the voters' roll with millions of addresses would be a mammoth task and will delay the elections. Well, Phakamile Hlubi is outside the Constitutional Court for us already this morning. And Phakamile, a very good morning to you. It looks like it's freezing where you are this morning, and I wonder if that's a sign of things to come later this morning.
Good morning, Yuveka. Yes, you're absolutely right. We are coming to you live from a freezing Constitutional Hill, which is outside the courthouse where we're expecting this landmark decision. As you correctly put it in your intro, we are waiting for the Constitutional Court to hand down a decision and basically say whether or not it will allow the IEC to proceed into the upcoming elections with a voters' roll that is not complete with addresses. Now, as you know, Yuveka, this has become quite a serious issue. This issue dates back all the way from 2013 when a group of independent candidates from a small town in Potchefstroom raised the issue when they realized that the lack of addresses had caused irregularities in a by-election that took place there. And in fact, standing with me outside court is HJ Mulman, who represented those independent candidates. HJ, we are waiting for this very important decision from the Constitutional Court. Effectively, the IEC asked the Constitutional Court for its assistance on this matter. It's a very complicated issue. There's a lot of things that are weighing on this case. What are your thoughts? What can we expect coming out of today?
I think to make it easy for your listeners is basically just to say what they were asking. That what gave cause for this case is a case in the Electoral Court where the Electoral Court found the voters' roll in Clockworth for the by-elections to be wanting because they were missing 4,160 addresses. And we went to the Electoral Court, and the Electoral Court upheld our objection to the voters' roll, and the certification of the voters' roll was set aside. The IEC then appealed to this court, saying that the Electoral Court was wrong because the obligation to provide addresses was only an issue of providing addresses they have available on the system. That was one of the reasons. Some of the other reasons was that the obligation to do so only came into force with the COM judgment. So they're appealing, and in the alternative, they say if the court don't uphold the appeal, because if the appeal is upheld, the second part will not be necessary. But if the appeal is dismissed, obviously they are asking the court for an indulgence, if I can say that, in the sense that they need to rectify the voters' roll. And actually, after the Electoral Court case, it became apparent that the problem with the absent addresses was not only an issue that was linked to Clockworth. In fact, it was a countrywide problem, and as a result thereof, they actually cancelled all the by-elections that were due to take place at the same time when the Clockworth by-elections took place.
On that issue, HJ, and it's interesting that you mentioned that, because where we are now is the fact that the IEC making these representations to court saying, look, we can't possibly update the voters' roll with the millions. At that time it was about 12 million addresses, but furthermore they're also saying, like you said, they're asking the court for its indulgence to proceed with the situation as it is. Yes. Now there were implications for that in 2013, which resulted in that by-election being declared irregular. So talk to us about that, because it does have serious implications. If this court were to, for instance, grant the indulgence that the IEC is seeking, what are the implications of that?
Look, the specific provision in the Electoral Act that requires the recording of addresses on the voters' roll is Section 16.3, and coincidentally the IEC has admitted in subsequent papers that they have misinterpreted that provision. But the purpose of that section deals with basically two important issues. The one is free and fair elections on the one side, and then obviously if you could break down free and fair elections into smaller particles, it deals with the issue of being able to campaign, to know who your voters are within a specific voting district, to get to them. That's the one important part, which is a constitutional right, the right to campaign. And then on the other side, it also deals with the issue of the combating of electoral fraud. And I think in the COM matter, although it was not an issue about addresses, obviously if you go back into the papers, you'll see in the COM matter there was no addresses. we had to get the addresses through the asking for copies of the REC1 documents that the voters completed when they registered. There was no voters' roll in those by-elections containing any addresses. The issue of the addresses only became an issue when the voters' roll that was supposed to be cleaned was certified with those 4,160 voters in Tlokwe without any addresses. And obviously, from our point of view, we know the town. That was certainly not a place where you would find, there is places, but the majority of the people, in fact we went so far as to investigate it, the majority of the people that appeared on the voters' roll without addresses are indeed people with addresses, totally verifiable addresses, street addresses. But what was perhaps more concerning, and that is to address your question, was that many of the people that were amongst those 4,160 voters eligible to vote without addresses were people that are not residing in Tlokwe. That's the one problem, and some of them are not residing in the wards where the by-elections were supposed to take place. And that is perhaps to illustrate the importance of the issue of addresses. Now, there's some confusion about addresses. People say that the threshold is an address. It has never been a threshold, because in the COM matter the court said addresses where it is available. But there's another provision in the Act that obliges the presiding officer that deals with registrations to make sure that when a person presents himself to register, that he should at least provide some description to enable that presiding officer to determine that this person is really residing in this ward, so as to allow that person to register. So it's not only addresses, but it's also an issue of if you are confronted by a voter that wants to register, there's a statutory obligation to ensure that that person does in somehow or some way indicate to you that he is eligible to vote in that specific district.
Right. And why that is important is because if you are voting in the area in which you are registered, then there's no irregularity, which is what took place in 2013, where over 1,000 people voted and they shouldn't have voted.
That's correct.
Thank you for summarizing that for us, Mr. Moorman. So we are waiting for 10 o'clock where we expect this landmark judgment, Dan, Yuveka, and we hope, of course, that the Constitutional Court will hand down a decision which will map a way forward, allowing us to hold these elections in August as expected.